when my mother, Diane Brooks, texted me, family dinner. 7 p.m., dress properly. I already knew what it meant. It wasn't about family. It was about control. I stared at the message, half asleep at my desk, blue light from my laptop flickering across a tangle of empty coffee cups. My co-founder, Maya Chen, had just left after another 14-hour coding sprint. We were 3 weeks from launching our first real product, a mental health AI app for teens, and I should have felt excited. Instead, I felt the familiar weight in my chest, the Brooks family summons. Dinner at my parents' estate in Atlanta always came with rules: show up, smile, and don't embarrass them. They called it quality time. I called it a performance. By 6:30, I was driving through iron gates that still bore my grandfather's initials. The B and W entwined like a crown. The house hadn't changed columns, marble, and the faint smell of power polished into the air. It was the kind of home people whispered about but never felt welcome in. Inside, I found my sister, Samantha Brooks, or Sam, posing near the grand piano while my mother snapped photos for her social feed. Sam looked like the glossy version of everything I was not: perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect smirk. She was Atlanta's rising real estate star, the daughter who made the family proud. "Lena," she said, eyes sweeping over my jeans. "You came casual. Startup casual," I answered, forcing a smile. My father, Richard Brooks, entered next, tie loosened, bourbon in hand. He carried that practiced air of a man who still believed he'd built everything with his own hands, even though most of it came from inheritance. "Good of you to show up, kiddo," he said, patting my shoulder like I was a guest, not his daughter. I nodded, biting my tongue. The same walls that held my childhood laughter now echoed with the sound of expectation. As we took our seats, the table glittered with silver and crystal, every plate placed like a warning. Diane raised her glass. "To family," she said, smiling that smile she reserved for charity galas and Christmas cards. "To family," everyone echoed. I lifted my glass too, the crystal cold against my fingers. My phone buzzed softly in my lap, a new message from Isabella Grant, our family's trust officer. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because tonight wasn't just another Brooks dinner. Tonight was the beginning of the end. The chandelier above the dining table glowed like captured sunlight, scattering reflections across the polished mahogany. The Brooks family dinner had always been more of a ceremony than a meal, a stage where appearances mattered more than truth. Tonight, that stage felt smaller, suffocating. My mother, Diane Brooks, sat at the head of the table, posture flawless, every strand of hair in place. She wore her pearls like armor. To her right, my father, Richard Brooks, scrolled through stock alerts on his phone between sips of bourbon, pretending to listen to the conversation. Across from me, Samantha Brooks, Atlanta's golden girl, was mid-story about closing another $1 million real estate deal. The sparkle of her diamond bracelet flashed each time she gestured, as if her success needed its own lighting cue. "So, Lena," my mother said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision, "how's that project of yours?" "Still chasing that app idea, still building it," I replied. Her sigh was soft but sharp. "You're almost 30. At some point, passion needs to pay the bills." My father nodded without looking up. "She'll figure it out when she runs out of time." A small laugh rippled from Sam, quiet but intentional. "You could always join my firm. I'm hiring assistants." I forced a smile. "I'll keep that in mind." The conversation moved on, but the room stayed heavy, full of things we'd never said aloud. My mother had spent her life polishing the family name until it gleamed she couldn't stand that her youngest daughter had traded designer heels for sneakers and startup dreams. To her, success meant reputation. To me, it meant freedom. The walls around us were lined with portraits of Brooks' ancestors, men with stern eyes and women draped in silk. Generations of wealth staring down at me like silent judges. My grandfather's face was there too. The memory of his voice flickered in my head. They'll measure you by their standards. Lena, build your own instead. I took a slow breath, reminding myself why I was here. This dinner wasn't about belonging. It was about survival. My company, Mind Nest, was weeks from launch. Every investor meeting, every sleepless night coding with Maya Chen, had brought me here to the edge of something real. I didn't need their approval. I needed proof that I could stand without it. But as I watched my family clink glasses and compliment themselves on being self-made, something inside me twisted. They didn't realize the irony that every luxury they flaunted, every dollar they spent, came from a trust fund I quietly managed. My phone buzzed again, face down beside my plate. Another message from Isabella Grant. The timing wasn't coincidence. My mother's voice broke through my thoughts. Lena, sweetheart, when will you realize not everyone gets to live off dreams? I looked up, meeting her gaze. For the first time, I didn't flinch. Maybe, I said softly, that's the difference between you and me. Her fork froze mid-air, and for a heartbeat, the room forgot to breathe. The sound of silverware echoed too sharply in the silence that followed. My mother, Diane, set down her wine glass with a quiet thud that felt rehearsed. Lena, she said, her voice polished but unkind. Your father and I have been talking. We think it's time you faced reality. I didn't answer. I'd learned that speaking too soon only fed the show. Across the table, Richard leaned back in his chair, the faint smirk of a man preparing to deliver a verdict. We're proud of how hard you've worked, he said, though his tone betrayed nothing but disappointment. But this app thing, it's not a future. It's a hobby. We've covered your rent, your car, your little business expenses long enough. He paused to sip his bourbon, eyes locked on mine. We're done being your bank. The words fell heavy, deliberate. Samantha grinned, swirling her wine as if to savor the moment. Guess we all grow up eventually. Huh, she said lightly. You could always shadow me for a while. Learn how real deals are made. My stomach nodded. I wanted to laugh, to tell her that the real deals she bragged about were built on the same trust fund I'd been managing for years, but I stayed silent. Diane dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin. We're not saying this to be cruel, sweetheart, she continued, as if cruelty required intent to count. We just think you need to learn what it means to stand on your own 2 feet. I have been, I said quietly. Richard frowned. Lena, independence doesn't mean playing with ideas that don't pay. I'm building something, I replied. Something that matters. Sam laughed. You mean that little therapy app, the one that hasn't made a cent? Come on. I felt the heat rise in my throat, but I forced a breath, steady and even. Maybe the things that matter don't start with a cent. The table went still. For a moment, no one spoke. The chandelier above us hummed faintly, catching the edge of Richard's glass as he set it down. Diane's voice softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. We love you, Lena. We just can't keep rescuing you. Don't worry, I said, finally lifting my glass. You won't have to. Under the table. My phone buzzed again, a message from Isabella Grant. I didn't open it yet, but I already knew. The real rescue was about to come from me. The air outside the dining room was cooler, quieter, almost merciful. I stepped into the hallway, letting the heavy doors close behind me, sealing in their laughter. My reflection stared back from a gold-framed mirror, tired eyes, clenched jaw, the daughter who never quite belonged. For a moment, I wondered when I had stopped trying to. My phone buzzed again. Isabella Grant, our family trust officer. The screen lit with her name like a secret waiting to be spoken. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the message, before sliding the phone into my pocket. I wasn't ready, not yet. A flicker of memory rose instead, uninvited, the scent of my grandfather's study oak, leather, and pipe smoke. Henry Whitman Brooks, The man who built everything they now called theirs. I was 25 the last time I saw him alive. He'd been frail but sharp-eyed, sitting behind his massive desk. You see the world differently. Lena, he'd said, his voice raspy but sure. You don't worship money. You see what it can do. When he told me he was naming me sole trustee of the family's financial trust, I thought he was joking. You trust me more than Dad I'd asked. He smiled faintly. Your father spends, you build. That conversation had stayed locked inside me for 3 years, a truth too volatile to expose. I'd signed the papers quietly, promised the lawyer I wouldn't interfere with the family's allowances unless absolutely necessary. Back then, I believed in peace more than justice. But standing in that hallway now, the echo of their voices seeping through the door, peace felt overrated. Their mockery, their smug certainty, it wasn't just arrogance, it was blindness. They had no idea their lives balanced on my signature. From the dining room came a burst of laughter, sharp and brittle. Sam's voice carried above the rest, boasting again about her next project. My fingers curled around my phone. The trust wasn't just money. It was accountability. And maybe, after years of silence, it was time for a reminder. I took a breath, straightened my shoulders, and pushed the door open. My mother's eyes flicked toward me, ready to continue the show. But this time, the script wasn't hers to control. When I stepped back into the dining room, the noise returned like a Tide crystal glasses clinking. Laughter bouncing off marble. The Brooks family in their natural habitat pretending everything was perfect. My mother, Diane, looked up as if nothing had happened, her smile poised and camera ready. There you are, darling. We were just talking about Sam's new development downtown, she said. Of course we were, I replied, sliding into my seat. Samantha, still glowing with self-importance, leaned forward. It's a 7-figure project. Lena, real clients, real returns. You should stop playing with code and start learning how business actually works. My father, Richard, chuckled approvingly. She's right, kiddo. Real estate, that's tangible. Not all this tech fantasy. I looked at the chandelier overhead, its light scattering across their polished faces. Everything about this family was surface reflection without depth. Maybe the world's changing, I said softly. Richard's voice hardened. The world doesn't change. People adapt. You either build something solid or you disappear. The words hit like a verdict. Diane raised her glass again. To adaptation. Then, and that was when the knock came at the door. 3 sharp taps that sliced through the conversation. The housekeeper appeared, uncertain. A Ms. Grant is here, ma'am. She says it's urgent. My mother frowned. Now, we're in the middle of dinner. Before she could dismiss her, Isabella Grant stepped into the room, every movement deliberate, crisp navy suit, leather folder in hand, composure radiating authority. Apologies for the intrusion. Mrs. Brooks, she said evenly. This couldn't wait. Recognition flickered in Diane's eyes. Isabella, the trust officer. Yes, Isabella replied, glancing briefly at me. I need Miss Lena Brooks's authorization for this month's disbursements. The silence that followed was immediate and sharp. Richard laughed. A short, mocking sound. You must be mistaken. I handle the family accounts. Isabella opened the folder, her tone steady but precise. According to the amended documents filed 3 years ago, Miss Brooks is the sole trustee of the Brooks Family Trust. No funds can be released without her consent. The room froze. Diane's hand tightened around her glass. That can't be right. Lena doesn't. She wouldn't. Dad. Sam interrupted, her voice shaking. She's joking. Right. I met her eyes, calm, steady. No joke. Richard's face reddened. You expect me to believe you've been running our trust? That's absurd. Isabella's professionalism never faltered. I assure you, sir, the documentation is clear. Miss Brooks manages the estate, vehicles, and all monthly allowances. For a moment, no one moved. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. I stood slowly, the scrape of my chair echoing through the stunned quiet. For 3 years, I said, every dollar you've spent every trip, every car payment, every mortgage installment went through me. Diane's face drained of color. Sam's mouth opened, but no sound came. Richard stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Isabella closed the folder gently. I'll await your approval. Miss Brooks, she said, nodding to me before turning toward the door. Her heels clicked across the marble, each step a punctuation mark in the silence she left behind. I lifted my glass again, my voice calm, almost kind, to adaptation. I said, and this time, no one dared to echo it. The moment the dining room door closed behind Isabella Grant, the silence that followed felt alive. No one reached for their glasses. No one moved. Even the chandelier above us seemed to hum with the tension pressing against the air. My mother, Diane, was the first to recover, forcing a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. This is clearly a misunderstanding, she said quickly. Isabella must have mixed up the paperwork. Richard didn't look convinced. His jaw worked as if grinding stone. Lena, he said slowly, his voice lowering to a warning. What is she talking about? I leaned back, calm, almost detached. Exactly what she said. I'm the trustee. Every cent that moves through this family runs through my authorization, Samantha scoffed, though her voice shook. Oh, come on. You expect us to believe you control Dad's accounts? This is ridiculous. I met her gaze evenly. Try making a withdrawal tomorrow. See what happens. The color drained from her face before she turned to our father. Dad, but Richard didn't answer. He was staring at me like I had spoken another language, one he suddenly realized he should have learned years ago. This is insane, he muttered. You're bluffing. I smiled faintly, the same way he had smiled when cutting me off 15 minutes earlier. You're welcome to test that theory. Under the table, my phone buzzed again. A message from Isabella. Need confirmation to proceed with monthly transfers. Another message followed seconds later from the bank, awaiting trustee approval. I opened the thread, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then, without looking up, I spoke softly. Hold all Brooks family disbursements, effective immediately. I hit send. A minute later, chaos began. Sam's phone lit first. Her eyes darted across the screen, confusion giving way to panic. My card just declined, she whispered. That can't be right. I used it this morning. She tried again, her breath quickening. It says frozen. Diane's pearls trembled against her collarbone as she turned to my father. Richard, tell me you paid the mortgage. He swallowed hard. Of course He stopped mid-sentence, realizing. The trust paid everything. I took a sip of water, steady. You might want to call the accountant before the weekend. Property taxes are due Monday. The silence that followed cracked like glass. Sam's phone kept buzzing partners, clients, missed calls. She pushed back her chair abruptly. You can't do this. Lena, you'll ruin us. I'm not ruining you, I said quietly. I'm just giving you what you said you wanted. Independence. Richard stood, face pale, voice trembling with a fury he didn't quite control. You're making a mistake. No, I said, standing too. I'm fixing one. The chandelier's reflection shimmered in my glass as I set it down. The sound echoed through the room like the closing of a vault. For the first time that night, I felt something like peace. The chaos hadn't settled when my phone buzzed again. A new notification flashing across the screen. It wasn't from the bank this time. The subject line froze me in place. Concerns about your startup's credibility. The sender, Mark Halpern, one of the venture capitalists I'd pitched to months ago. My stomach turned. I opened it, scanning the first lines. The words hit like a blade. We've heard troubling things about MindNest's legitimacy. Your sister suggested investors should be cautious rumors of financial instability. My sister? I looked up from the phone. Samantha was pacing now, still arguing with our parents about accounts and credit lines. Her voice sharp and frantic. The noise blurred around me as the email burned into my vision. I stood slowly, the chair scraping the marble floor. "Sam," I said, my voice steady but low. She turned, irritation flashing in her eyes. What? I held up my phone. "You told investors my company was a scam." The air snapped. Even my father stopped breathing. "What are you talking about?" she said quickly, the color draining from her face. "Don't lie to me," I said, stepping closer. "Mark Halpern just emailed me. He heard it directly from you," she stammered, searching for an escape. I didn't mean you didn't mean to destroy the only thing I've built." Diane's voice broke in, trembling but defensive. "Lena, she was only protecting the family's reputation. You know how gossip spreads in our circles." I turned toward her. "You knew." Her eyes darted away. "She told us afterward. We thought that it was fine." My voice cracked, years of swallowed words surfacing all at once. "You thought it was fine to ruin me as long as no one whispered about you at your precious fundraisers." Richard tried to interject, his tone low, pleading. "Your sister made a mistake. Let's not make it worse." "Worse," I laughed. "Bitter and raw. You called me irresponsible, childish, ungrateful, and the whole time, you lived off the money I managed while she was out there burning my career to the ground." Samantha's mask finally slipped. "You think I wanted to," she shouted, her voice shaking. "You were dragging our name through the mud with that stupid app I was saving us." Her confession hung in the air like smoke. "You weren't saving anyone," I said quietly. "You were jealous." She froze. I turned toward our parents. "You defended her. You always did. And now you want me to believe this was love." Diane's hand trembled as she reached for her pearls, her voice barely audible. "We just wanted what's best for you." "No," I said, my tone cutting clean through the lie. "You wanted what's best for your reflection." The room felt smaller now, every surface mirroring their shame. Years of silence between us had finally found their sound, and it wasn't forgiveness. The night had started with their laughter. Now it ended with truth. No one moved. The words I'd spoken still hung in the air, heavy as the crystal chandelier above us. My family, the people who once defined my world, sat frozen in the ruins of their own pride. Diane, my mother, stared at her untouched plate, lips trembling but no sound coming out. Richard gripped his glass like it could anchor him to the illusion of control. And Samantha, the sister who once gloated about saving the family name, looked at me with eyes that no longer carried power, only panic. I stood tall at the end of the table. The marble beneath me reflected the flickering light, fractured and uneven, like the foundation of our family. "For years," I said quietly, "I signed every check that kept this fantasy alive. The house, the cars, the vacations. Your business deals, all of it. You thought you were helping me, but it was me keeping you afloat." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "You ungrateful," I cut him off, my tone sharp and calm. "Don't. You built nothing. You inherited wealth and called it wisdom. You spent decades teaching me how to depend on you, when all along, you were depending on me." Diane's breath hitched. "Lena, please, this isn't who you are." I turned toward her, meeting her eyes. "No, Mom, this is exactly who I am. The daughter you taught to stay quiet, to be polite, to never embarrass the family. I stayed silent long enough to let you believe your version of me. But tonight, I'm done playing that role." Samantha stood abruptly, tears streaming down her face. "You can't just cut us off. My accounts are frozen. My projects, my clients. You'll ruin me." I stared at her, a strange calm settling in my chest. You ruined yourself when you decided my failure was worth more than my success. She shook her head, voice cracking. You don't understand. I did everything they wanted me to. I became their perfect daughter. And now look at me what's left for the first time. I saw her not as an enemy, but as a mirror. She was what I could have become if I'd kept chasing their approval. What's left, I said softly, is the truth. Richard's voice broke through again, brittle with desperation. If you shut off the trust, the taxes will eat the estate alive. The bank will take everything. Then maybe it's time the world sees how fragile your empire really was. He slumped back, defeated. Diane's pearls clattered against the glass as her hands shook. We're your family, she whispered. You can't just walk away. I took a long breath, steady and final. Family doesn't destroy what you love to protect what they own. The chandelier flickered again, one bulb burning out with a soft pop. I picked up my phone, glanced once more at their faces, and set it down on the table. You wanted me to grow up, I said. Congratulations. I finally did, and with that, I turned and walked out, leaving them to the silence they'd created. 6 months passed, and the Brooks estate was no longer the glittering symbol it once was. The gates that had once guarded its prestige now stood open, the marble steps chipped and bare. A quiet for sale sign leaned against the hedges where my mother used to pose for charity photos. The papers called it a family downsizing, but everyone in Atlanta knew the truth. The empire had crumbled. Richard Brooks and Diane Brooks moved into a modest apartment on the edge of the city. The neighbors didn't know their name, and that anonymity became their new currency. My father spent his mornings pacing, searching for relevance, rereading old financial reports as if they still meant something. My mother, stripped of the spotlight, began volunteering at a small community center, an act that looked noble from the outside, but was mostly her attempt to stay visible to anyone who still remembered her. Samantha Brooks had fallen the hardest. Her real estate deals collapsed one by one after her accounts were frozen. Clients pulled out, partnerships dissolved, and the glossy magazine covers that once praised her success stopped calling. She ended up behind a desk at a small property office, filing contracts for people who didn't know she used to own the skyline. Every now and then, I'd get a voicemail from her, half apology, half desperation, but I never pressed play. Some things were better left unheard. Meanwhile, Maya Chin and I stood in our new office, sunlight spilling through glass walls. The city skyline stretched wide below us. The logo of MindNest gleamed on the far wall, clean, simple, strong. Investors were calling now. Our app had reached thousands of users, and every review felt like another brick in a foundation I had built myself. Maya leaned beside me, smiling. We did it. Lena. I looked out at the same city that had once looked down on me, and smiled back. No, I said. We earned it. For the first time, the word family meant something different, not blood, not obligation, but the people who believed in you when no one else did. The city lights of Atlanta shimmered beyond my office window, each one a reminder of everything I had built from the ashes. For years, I believed silence was weakness, that keeping the peace was love. But I learned that sometimes silence is the strongest answer you can give. My family mistook control for care, pride for love, and I let them, until I didn't. Now, when people ask about the Brooks legacy, I smile. The legacy isn't the mansion or the money, it's the freedom that came when I stopped needing their approval. MindNest wasn't just a startup anymore. It was proof that belief, once planted in the right soil, can outgrow any inheritance. I closed my laptop, the city humming below. This wasn't revenge, I whispered. It was consequence. And for the first time in my life, that consequence felt like peace.